That's good.
Hi everyone, welcome to another Community Tech Talk. My name is Martin Bald. I am the Community Manager here at Wallaroo, and we've got another exciting talk today from our very own technical engineer, field engineering manager. And a little bit different. Usually what we do is we go through some tutorials and we show code and things like that. And the last two, if you've watched the podcast with Tim Huckabee, we really want to get into talking about some of the best practices, the habits, the pitfalls, and what to avoid when going into production. As there are a lot of companies that are looking to move into production, but there's mismatch of tools, and they're really not sure. Well, how do we take this model from that experimentation, ideation, and testing into that production phase? And so hopefully in a session like this, we can help you think about those things ahead of time and overcome them, and so that you're not delaying your production process. And the end result and the big picture is that gives that ROI back to the business with that model, and any other models in production as well. And so that's hopefully what we're all here for, is to help our businesses make money. So just a quick level set before we go into it. A couple of folks on other sessions have joined, and they've said, hey, what do you guys do? So yeah, we're a Series A startup. We've been around since 2017. We are Microsoft funded by the Microsoft N12 group. And so essentially what we do is we are that model operations center. We are ML production platform running on Azure, AWS, and GCP. And also for the enterprise, we do on-premises as well, and also at the edge. So with edge deployments becoming more capable with the power of the compute capabilities at the edge, we also do AI at the edge as well. And we have some content on that. But that's essentially where we fit in. We are that ML production, that platform. We integrate into those other investments that you've made as well, so you're not having to relearn things or go through training and delays and that additional hurdle. We slot right into that familiar environment that your data scientists, your ML engineers, and your DevOps folks work with on a day-to-day basis. And so with that, I'll hand it over to my colleague to introduce himself. Steve?
Thanks, Martin. My name is Steve Notley, and as you said earlier, I'm the field engineering manager here at Wallaroo. I joined a little over a month ago, and excited to be working with everybody here. So my background is in AI and ML theory. I studied that at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and then during my time in industry, I've really been focused on applying AI techniques to solve various problems across a pretty wide variety of industries. Finance for kind of the longest chunk of time, also some work on kind of the manufacturing and energy production side, and most recently in the field of biology and biotechnology, namely around precision medicine and applications of that in the pharmaceutical industry. And I've now most recently joined Wallaroo, as I said, around a month and change ago, to really focus on this deployment side, as that's something that I see as a commonality across all of the industries that I've worked in and worked on applying AI techniques to. Deployment is always something that can be improved, and something that is consistently a hurdle that these industries need to tackle.
Yeah, and it's great to have you here, Steve. I think even in the 4 weeks that you've been here, we've seen a difference in the approach that we take to engaging with the customers, at that engineering level, and the folks within those businesses. And as we look at it, things like obviously from ML production, but when we work with those customers, and some of the projects I've been involved in past roles, where there's a lot of energy and effort in getting this ideation, and then you go through the experimentation, building the model, testing it, and then things tend to grind to a halt. We talk about the pitfalls, and what's the biggest one that you've seen in your time for companies that sort of run into those situations, and what practices can they put in place?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is where we kind of get into talking about everyone thinking about deployment just a little bit too late in this process. And I really think that is the biggest pitfall that I see across industries. And it really speaks to kind of the divide that we see in lots of these companies, right? We have the data science side, and that really kind of represents more of an R&D unit, right? They get this problem statement, they have the data that they need, and they spend a really long time going through all of those familiar parts of the process, right? Developing out a model, gauging its performance, iterating on that until they get something that's just right. And in some of these more heavily regulated industries like finance, like medicine, model validation and iterating from that perspective, right? The explainability and security of the model is also a huge component. And then when they get everything to be just right, they feel like they've solved the problem. But all too often at that point, when they've kind of gotten everything just the way that they want it, that's when they start thinking about deployment, and they start to approach the machine learning engineering teams to get it into production. But all too often it ends up being really not that simple, right? That the requirements of production are such that it ends up causing further iterations. And from there, maybe that model has to re-go through validation, and that tweaks it even more. And then it ends up being this cycle of back and forth that can add, weeks, months. I've actually seen years added to getting a model from that quote unquote finished stage to production because of those requirements of around iteration. And, to me, that's really one of the reasons why Wallaroo exists, is because we really believe that there doesn't need to be a mechanism of deployment that causes you to change these models, to involve all of these other technologies. That you really should be able to just take that model that you've worked a really long time on as a data scientist, that you've gotten validated, that performs well, and you should be able to just get that into production, get it to a state where it is out there and serving predictions, where it's scalable, where it runs on the hardware as you describe it, exactly the way that you wrote it and the way that you intended. So, I think that big pitfall is really thinking about deployment too late, and the way that we as Wallaroo intend to solve that is really by making deployment something that you really just have to, that you can really take control of yourself as the data scientist and work into that process much earlier on, and in a much simpler way.
And with that, it's and just I was involved in some proof of concepts, with sort of we were looking at a company, we're looking at fresh fruit, for example, and doing the modeling on the fruit, underripe, ripe, bruised, battered, that kind of thing. And then the other one was like drinks, right? So it was computer vision, taking drinks from a fridge at retail locations. And I agree with what you said, because there's all that energy, let's we got to build a model, and you do this project management, and then especially with the drinks one, we were using cellular, because we couldn't tap into their computers at the stores. So we had to use cellular. And you're trying to sell computer vision images over cellular, that's a massive cost as well. And then, there's the architecture, and then you got to go through, just talking to the security folks within there as well. And they're like, no, you're not going to do this, right? And so, things, if you don't do that pre-work ahead of time, then you're just going to run into major issues. The other thing that is interesting, and I think I showed this in our slide, where we fit in, is there's a lot of other technologies out there as well that that are in those sort of pre-production and post-production stages. Like, have you seen challenges with that integration and bringing all those pieces of the jigsaw together?
Yeah, it's a great question. So broadly speaking, I have seen a lot of folks struggle with, making sure that the technology that they have been working in has, everyone has their preferred technology, and these different parts of the puzzle have their own owners with their own experiences and their own preferences. And so, sometimes the data scientists and what they're working in to develop their models, sometimes those technologies don't have a tight integration with the ML engineers and what they prefer to use to get that model out to deployment. And so another thing that, I think we've put a lot of emphasis on here is really making sure that Wallaroo integrates very seamlessly into all of these other technologies that you really see, on the slide that you have here, and making sure that you really can, plug and play. And so that has been a focus here, and I think we've been able to do that quite well. And I think that getting out there and publishing the community edition of Wallaroo is also something that has helped with that, because it lets people get their hands on it, try it out, and lets them make us put our money where our mouth is by trying that out, seeing that integration firsthand, seeing how easy it is, so that they can get a taste of that before even kind of engaging with us more formally.
Yeah, definitely. I know the old back in the day, you sort of go to a customer and they were like, yeah, we've got this, and then you say, oh well, you got to rip this out and replace it with this, right? You rip and replace, like they'll slam the door in your face right away, because something that company's made, a bet on that, it's their probably careers dependent on it. And so yeah, having technologies that fit right in or slot right into your existing infrastructure is super important. And like you said, like the data scientists have their tools, and this also comes into this practices of, we don't want people throwing things over the wall to the other division. You want that to be break down those barriers and have those folks in a true ML ops practice as well. And then how have you seen what sort of practices have you seen of people sort of bringing those different roles together, and breaking down those barriers from data scientists to ML engineers, to DevOps?
Yeah, so we've seen definitely much more of a push towards fairly integrated teams, where kind of, as I kind of spoke to at the beginning, right? People are realizing that these are considerations that need to be brought into the model development front, right? We can't have those clear lines between R&D and production, because you start to get that, kind of waterfall flow of, we get all the way to the end and then we find ourselves back at the top. We need to start over, right? And so we are seeing those teams that are more integrated, and that's an area where we have really, that was something that was important to us, was to make sure that we are helping everybody to save that time, and making sure, as you said earlier, that we're not throwing things over the wall as part of this solution. And so we have really set this up in such a way that it enables data scientists to start to take some of those early stages of deployment, and go, own some of that themselves. And then the ML engineers can really focus on that fine tuning and optimization around, what hardware do we want to make available for this? What services do we want to use to actually serve this? What does it need to be integrated with on the other end? Rather than spending time kind of vetting these models and going back and working on those revisions. And even more so than that, it allows them to really think about all of the things that come after deployment, right? Because deployment really is just the first step of getting a model out there into the world. And after you've gone through all these iterations and you have a model in deployment, these problems don't stay static over time, right? There's always drift in the data that can cause your models to kind of lose their edge over time. There's always the next best model and next best thing that everyone's experimenting with, and the question being asked of, okay, should this be replacing the models that we already have in production that we finished here, and all of these other things around automation and integration with other services. So having that kind of integration upstream and freeing up time from the ML engineers, reducing the number of iterations that it takes to get that initial model into the pipeline, they can sort of think about, okay, what is the best way to monitor for drift? At what point do we want to trigger retraining? How should I be thinking about these results from my new challenger model as opposed to, what has been my champion? And so Wallaroo, we of course have this deployment engine that makes it easier to deploy these models, get them out there quickly, allows the data scientists to own part of that themselves. But we also have a lot of tools that cover this post-deployment arena, right? We in just a couple of lines of code allow you to deploy multiple models in concert for A/B testing or shadow deployment to see how that new shiny model stacks up against the one that's tried and true. We have the ability to monitor both inputs and outputs for drift and alert you when we detect that. And so we're really interested in building a platform that sits on that deployment step, and then also all of those considerations that go into that deployment and MLOps lifecycle, to make everything as efficient and integrated as we can.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, super important. Yeah, and yeah, it's when the production doesn't, you don't roll out that banner once you deploy, the model to production, right? That's just also the beginning of the journey. And like you say, making sure you close that loop, and it's not just one model, right? I watched a podcast recently in the financial company, like 3,000 models that they're managing, and what sort of overhead does that put on? Like, we talk about automation and orchestration and things like that. Like, what is that an approach, and is it sort of crushing weight on some of these teams to manage all these models at the same time?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great point. And as you say, yeah, 3,000 is definitely a number that we hear not infrequently. There's companies out there that, especially in industries that are very heavy on modeling and on forecasting, where there's all of these moving parts that are modeled separately. And that means, as you said, a huge number of models to really think about, to develop, to maintain, to ultimately replace, to make sure that they're performing at peak. And sometimes we do see companies that even at that scale are still managing a lot of pieces in such a way that they're not really repeatable or not recyclable, and so you see people needing to scale a lot of these machine learning engineering teams and operations side teams with those numbers of models, right? So, and that all comes from the fact that, for every model, in some cases, they're needing to make their own containers, to chase down these own dependencies, to really start from scratch every time to deploy these models. And so one area where we aim to provide a lot of value is by allowing for that scalability, right? The process in Wallaroo looks really similar as model to model as you're deploying it. And that allows you to not be spending so much time on these very bespoke operations to getting these individual models into production. And again, that's all time you get back for these other parts of the process.
Yeah, and this is where I do the shameless plug, where we've just released ML workload orchestration. So we actually have a video on that if folks want to have a look at that and investigate it. Like Steve said, for managing all those different models. When you go through a tutorial, you're typically just doing one model, but when you get into the real world, it's hundreds, in some cases thousands of models that you and your teams are having to manage as well. And so with some of the things I've seen recently as well, with especially in the last 2-3 months, where we look at these trends. Companies have been sort of, in some cases successfully deploying. Some companies are now kicking the tires and trying to figure out how do we make AI and ML work for us. And yeah, in those last, this last, 3 months, we've just seen, generative AI with, ChatGPT and, Bing Chat and things like that take hold. What are the, this trend, within LLMs, what sort of plays do you see within that? And then also, what other sort of trends do you see, and have you sort of come across in your discussions with customers?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. Obviously, LLMs, as you noted, are taking this part of the world by storm, right? We hear them everywhere. We're seeing them in so many parts of our daily life already, and so that has been a huge advent. And frankly, we've seen a lot of companies really rewrite their AI playbook and roadmap based on kind of these LLMs coming out and becoming more mainstream, demonstrating the power that they really have. And it has really unlocked a lot of use cases that we haven't really seen so far in AI. It's really opened a lot of doors knowing that we have these models out there, and that there are a bunch of tasks that they perform well on. Now, the thing that it poses as a complication is the resource intensiveness, right? We had already heard before ChatGPT, before LLMs, before any of that, there was already so much demand on the hardware on, some of the larger side of these CV models and others, that even throwing, state-of-the-art GPUs at this, parallelizing it heavily, that runtime was still an issue. And the energy bill that it racks up is no joke either, even if you have it, very well optimized. And so, that's definitely something that's on people's minds. And, an area where I would say there's a similar aspect on people's minds, where there is also a large kind of move toward it in the industry, is the edge, right? And so this is another thing we hear about everywhere, is some cases where data is coming in with such velocity, or it's of such volume, that it makes sense to move that compute out to that location and move the model out to that location rather than to ferry that data back. The example you gave earlier is a great one of that grocery store and needing to feed video back, right? You're talking about bouncing that video off of cell towers and all of this stuff. There's so many situations where that just doesn't make sense, where it makes sense to move the model to that location and be running that inference on site. Now, that has implications around hardware constraints as well. Very different, right? LLMs are, pushing what hardware is out there to the max. And on the edge, we have a different kind of constraint where we want to run it on the most minimal hardware possible, because there's often just a very different set of hardware constraints on embedded devices or on these other edge locations that we see. And in both of those, the central theme is, how can I get these models to run as efficiently as possible, given these limitations on hardware? And so one thing that we haven't really talked about yet is the efficiency that really underpins Wallaroo's inference engine, right? So Wallaroo as a platform makes it really easy to deploy. But really, one of the things that sets us apart is that our inference engine is so efficient, so fast, compared to just regular containerization of these models. And so this is an area where we think we're really positioned to help with some of these emerging technologies, because we think we're well positioned to really allow some of these more complex models to run on more minimal hardware, or to just do more with the hardware that you have. And then similarly on the edge side, trying to push the bounds of how complex a model can I really have on these limited hardware that I have available. And so this is something that plays exactly into what we're thinking about, and anything that we can do to help those fields progress is going to be a big agenda item for us moving forward, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, the power at the edge and those devices and what they're capable of is, it's quite astounding. Just if you 5 years back to where we are now, and the ability, like you said, to distribute that processing out to the edge and not round trip it out to the cloud, and latency and inferencing, latency costs and storage and networking and all that sort of stuff comes into it. Could be a limiting factor, right? Because at the end of the day, the people that sign the check are like, hey, wait a minute, this is probably costing more than we're going to get back in ROI, from this one, right? So they nix it right at the beginning. Just I know you've been super generous with your time, but if there's like three things, like when you go into a customer, or if someone's looking at ML production, what are the three sort of tips that you would give them to start now thinking about?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say it's important to, I guess the first one would be, as we talked about, super important to be thinking about what are your constraints and requirements for production from the very start, making sure that those are things that are on your mind and known requirements as your data scientists are really working on developing those models, not, after they're done. Second, I would say is making sure that you have a plan and a process for all of these post-deployment activities. Making sure that you're, thinking about, okay, at what point do I want to take a look at potentially retraining this model? What is my process for replacing those models when I do decide that it might need retraining, or when I decide that, that there's a new model that might be performing better. And then the last one, I would say is really more of strategy of thinking about how everything works in concert, right? Making sure that not just in integration from a process standpoint upstream, but making sure that you have something that at the end of the day is ready to scale, and that you have a process and a stack of technologies that end to end is built for the long haul, right? Not just for this project. And so keeping in mind that as you're building out this stack and thinking about what production really and these processes look like for you, making sure that you're thinking about, does this hold at 5 models? Does it hold at 10 models? How about 1,000? How about 10,000? And making sure that is top of mind from the start as well.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah. Great. Words of wisdom there for anyone that's looking to, getting ML production. And, as Steve mentioned, thanks, Steve. I'll give you the money later. Yeah, you talked about the community edition. And so we have that community edition. License doesn't expire. We're not going to pound you with, sales or marketing emails. You might get some of them, but essentially it's an opportunity to, like Steve said, get your hands on. We have a number of hands-on labs, tutorials that you can then go through yourself, build that skill set, understand, not just getting into production, but also, as Steve said, that post-production of, how do we then validate those models, monitor those models, and then in some cases we can actually hot swap on the fly without taking that whole production environment down. And then we also have, that environment that you're familiar with. You can work in the UI, you can work with the SDK, or we also have API documentation and capabilities as well. So, yeah, definitely encourage you to check them out, and all the other content that we have. And Steve, again, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. I know that you're super busy, and I'll let you get back to your customers and driving them onto production and success beyond.
Amazing. This was fun. Thank you for having me, Martin.
Awesome. Thanks very much. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
You as well. Bye-bye.